EP22. This is part of the story of David. So we've been looking at Saul for 2 weeks, and we saw David and Saul didn't get along too well together last time. But in the end, where were we at the end? Um, we had a scene where Saul is hunting David, but then David spares his life, even though he could have killed him. And Saul has this long-winded apology saying, "You're more in the right than I," and he wishes him well and hopes that everything will go well for him. He says, "I know that you are going to become king," even though Saul is king. So he says, "Please don't kill my descendants." And David says, "Okay." So that was their last encounter, and we talked a lot about how David's character is kind of revealed in this cat and mouse game that they've been playing, and thought about why is it that he spares Saul, and they seem to part ways then, and everything seems to be okay, except there's more to come. So the new part of our story begins with Samuel, the prophet who anointed both of them king, dying. And David apparently participates in burying him, and then he wanders off into the wilderness. But then we have a story that doesn't have directly to do with Saul, but again, it's a story about David's character, and in some ways it's one of those troubling stories. It ends well, but we start to see that not only is David have some positive qualities, he also has some negative potential as well. And this is also an important story because it's how he gets his second wife. He's going to have like 15 wives at the end, but right now he just has one. He's going to get, well, he had one, right? Saul's daughter, when Saul then married her to someone else. But so David is on the lam right now, and we're told that there's um, this guy who's very wealthy, has all these flocks and stuff. He's in the territory that David patrols, David and his band of merry men. So we're told the guy's name is Nabal, and he has a wife named Abigail. And we're given character traits of these two characters. The woman, I guess that's her, was intelligent and attractive, but Nabal was harsh and bad mannered. Notice it doesn't say he was unattractive, so it's kind of interesting. They give different types of character traits for them. This will be important because David's going to be attracted to her. But first, the husband has to die. So, how does this work? So, David hears that this guy is shearing his flock, and so he sends his messengers to Nabal to tell him, um, "How you doing, friend? I've just heard that you are shearing your sheep. When your shepherds were with us, when we were hanging out here in the wilderness as merry men or outlaws, we didn't injure them. We were nice to them. We didn't steal anything of yours. So, maybe you could help us." Again, this is kind of a double-edged sword here. So here's this paramilitary group, or is it 600, mercenaries basically with David, who's saying, "We could have hurt you and we chose not to. So can you do something nice for us?" I mean, yes, well, we're glad you didn't hurt us, but it's sort of like, we wouldn't want anything to happen to those sheep. Anyway, Nabal does not take this well. When David's merry men come and tell him this, he has some pretty straight words for David. He says, "Who is this guy?" Nowadays, there are many servants who run away from their masters, of course, referring to David's being on the lam from the king. "Must I take my bread, my wine, my meat that I have slaughtered for my own shares and give them to men who I don't know where they're from?" In other words, he's saying, how dare you presume that I should help you? I mean, basically, this is a protection racket that David has, whether it's willing or not. But Nabal's not playing along. Okay, so David's minions tell him what happened, and his response is, "Let everyone strap on his sword." Notice, we're not told what he intends to do with it, but they all, suit up, and they're going to head off. A major part of his militia are going to go pay Nabal a visit. One of Nabal's servants tells the intelligent and attractive wife Abigail on them, David is few. But he this is his reaction. I'm going to kill them all. Now that's kind of interesting because David up until now has been kind of measured and non-vengeful, right? That was the whole thing about Saul. He's not vengeful towards him. When there was a dispute among his men, he says, let's get along. But here he says, someone just refused me something, so I'm gonna murder his entire population. That sounds a lot like a character from the book of Genesis, uh, who was a descendant of Cain. Right? Cain was the murderer, and his descendant, what is it, Lamech, it becomes a mass murderer. So this now it seems like David is becoming like Lamech. In any case, she reacts by abasing herself before him and giving a very long apology. And she says, just blame me instead. Don't harm my husband or his people. And he says, by the way, my husband's stupid. He's foolish. He wasn't thinking what he was saying. And I didn't know what he did. I wasn't there, so I'm going to give you a different response. She says, um, Yahweh has kept you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand. May all your enemies end up like Nabal. But he says, her stopping him is basically God saying, don't take revenge in this case. That's what she's trying to posit to him. Now, we've seen examples of other people around David telling him what God means by a certain event, right? He says, God has put Saul in your power so you can do whatever you want. And David says, no, I don't think that's the case. Here she's saying, God is telling you not to do this, and he's going to listen to her, maybe because she's attractive or intelligent at the same time. So she gives this long, please accept these gifts from me, forgive the offense, please don't kill us. Everyone knows, she says, that you are going to become king eventually. Why sully your reputation with murdering innocent people? So she's giving him various arguments why he shouldn't do what he's about to do. And then he says, oh, okay, blessed are you, blessed everything because of what you said. This still is kind of interesting and disturbing. Today you have prevented me from shedding blood and from rescuing myself from my own hand. So rescuing myself with my own hand, that seems to be his original intent. I'm going to rescue myself from Nabal by destroying him and his household. That kind of, puts things, when he's sober, she explains what happened. When he's sober, she explains what happened. And then we're told his heart died within him and he became like a stone. We're not sure quite what that means, but it's probably not good. And we're told later God strikes him and he dies. Okay, so the fool is dead. Now, David is going to interpret this as, thank you, God, for avenging me. So he still has this vengeance mindset, but I'm going to let God do it rather than me do it, so I don't have to be sullied by such blood. But there's more. He says, please go tell that intelligent and attractive woman that I offer I offer her my hand in marriage to her. And so she decides to accept his suit, and she becomes his wife. It is interesting when we'll get like the later list of David's wives, she is always continually called the wife of Nabal. Uh, and that has led to speculation about whether this is a whitewashed version of maybe something a little more underhanded in which she may have been part of, or it may be making a point that he takes other people's wives. But in any case, in its current sanitized version, obviously it's an important story about restraint and about the way that someone can cause restraint, through intelligent words. And so she joins the band of merry men. They get married. He has two wives now. He's happy. Okay, but then we are told Saul gives David's first wife, that basically Saul's daughter, he gives her to someone else. Now, why tell us this? I mean, well, we were just like right after telling us who David's current wives are. Why tell us that Saul has remarried his daughter to someone other than David? Well, again, the last time we heard from Saul, he was very contrite, right? He says, you're in the right, I'm in the wrong. You know, I'll never do anything wrong to you. Well, is giving your wife to someone else a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, as the king, he can do what he wants with his family members, I guess. Depends. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you get equal value?
That's a good question because remember, David had to kill several Philistines as a dowry. I don't know if this guy had to do that, but anyway, this is going to become important later, right? Okay, so we go back to something which is the next story. This is a doublet. A doublet is a repeated story or a type scene. Now, I put the parallels up here. So the parallel is what we ended up with last time when, right, Saul heard where David was and he found out that he was hiding. Here again, some people tell Saul where David is. And Saul responds exactly the same way. He takes 3,000 of his best men and searches for David. He takes 3,000 of his best men and searches for David. It's almost as though he's forgotten everything that he said he would not do, right? Now, it may be that there's sort of one tradition that has been preserved in two different forms, and the composer of this narrative has seen fit to include both of them, which is something that as readers we would want to say, well, why do they repeat something so obvious, right? Anyway, so they go marching. He marches out to him. Saul finds out where he is. He goes to his camp at night, and he talks to his buddies and says, "Hey, I need one of you to come down with me to Saul, right in the middle of his camp." So one guy comes with him. They sneak up to him without anyone noticing, and again, there is a parallel here. Um, when we last week, remember one of David said, God has put him in your hands, do what you want to him. Same thing, different servant says, God has put your enemy in your hand today. Let me nail him to the ground with the thrust of a spear, and we will not need to strike twice. In other words, we could get rid of this guy, stop him from following us. But as you can imagine, David says, no. In the first version, David says, God forbid I should do this to the Lord's anointed. Same thing here in a little more elaborate language. Remember how did he show Saul that last time that he could have killed him but didn't? He cut a part of his garment out. He does something different here. He takes Saul's spear and a jug of water and goes back to his hiding place so he can prove at a distance that he could have done this. Same idea of the story, but different details. Okay, so they take the jug and the spear, they leave, and then finally, when he's at a safe distance, he calls down to Saul's bodyguard, hey, and his bodyguard's name is Abs. Happen and the same resolution. What does that tell us? The fact that it's been repeated as readers, just experiencing it. Yeah, go for it. They had nothing else to do. Well, again, scribes don't like to throw anything away, so they're not going to delete drafts or anything. They're going to keep it all in there. What else?
Maybe it's in order for like David to still look favorable, even though he might do horrible things in the future. Minor like this.
So every chance to make David look good, we're going to keep, right? Even if it includes those sort of ambiguous pieces, that's one possibility. What about yeah?
Both of the Kings that wasn't sorry, first and second Kings.
We're still in the book of Samuel, yeah.
This is the guy. Was that a separate book outside what we have in the Bible?
So both this book and the one we'll be reading later, it sometimes refers to books, like the book of the record of what the kings did. So obviously there were records that were preserved in various forms well, if they're friendly, that could be an asset, right? Here you have outlaws who have no permanent allegiance to their king, and they could serve me instead, right? That's exactly what they're going to think about. So Achish is very friendly to them. He lets them all come in and stay, and we're told it worked. Saul stopped looking for David. Not worth it to attack the enemy's stronghold just to find David. Not only that, but Achish gives David a kind of, a castle. He gives him his own town, this place called Ziklag. So this is sort of a fortress town. So really, he's establishing this as a paramilitary group to protect his kingdom against Israel, right? Irony, we meet again. Okay, so we're told then, again, here's the kind of, kind of ambiguous stuff. What did they do when they were mercenaries for the Philistines? We're told that David and his men went out on raids against various peoples. And when they attacked, when they raided someone's land, David would not leave man or woman alive, but would carry off sheep, oxen, donkeys, camels, and clothes. Okay, so normally, if you're just trying to get stuff, you're going to leave the people alive. But he's killing everyone. Why? We'll hear in a moment. So he would return to to his overlord now, who would ask, "Who did you raid this week?" He says, "Oh, we raid one of these places." But notice, all of the places he says he's raiding are in the land of Judah, which is his homeland. But we're told by the narrator he didn't raid his homeland. So he's telling the king something opposite of what he's doing. He's trying to make it look like he's fighting his own countrymen on behalf of the king, but really he's avoiding fighting his own countrymen, which would make him good, relatively speaking, right? If you have an audience, Israelite audience here. Um, and he also said there was a reason for this. He never left anyone alive because he thought they will betray us and say, this is what David did. In other words, if I leave someone alive, they'll tell my boss that who I was really raiding. So, well, okay, that doesn't help the people who are dead, though, right? And David is not a simple character. Sometimes he seems quite virtuous, and other times he seems quite pragmatic. It's here, survivalist. Okay. Yeah, and the point was for him to think that the king says, his people must certainly detest him. I shall have him as I've asked forever. That's what the king thinks. Okay, so eventually there's going to be another battle between the Philistines and Israel. And he says, you realize, of course, that you and your warriors march out for battle with me against your own people. And David says, yeah, let's get him. I'll show you what I'll do to the Israelites. Of course, he's double talking him here. He says, in fact, I'll appoint you as my permanent bodyguard. So maybe David's not so happy here because it's getting harder and harder for him to escape the destiny of killing his own people, right? Because of where he's standing at the moment. Fortunately for him, maybe by providence, of the way that here, background to what happens next. We're told that Samuel is dead. We already knew that. Um, Meanwhile, Saul had driven mediums and diviners out of the land. We're told this because we're about to have a story with a medium in it, a spirit medium. Anyway, that's sort of flesh. The Bible likes to tell us stuff before it tells us stuff. Okay, so the Philistines are going to fight, and Saul's going to fight them. But we're told that Saul gets very afraid because apparently there's more of them than him, and David's on the other side. So Saul begins to consult God, right? There's his divination device. And this gives him no answers, and the prophets give him no answers. So he's trying to get help from Yahweh. Yahweh is not talking to him. So he needs advice on how to fight this battle that seems to have insurmountable odds. What is he going to do? He's going to turn to a medium. He says, find me a medium. He says, well, there happens to be one down at this town called Endor. It's a famous story called the Witch of Endor, the medium of Endor. So he drove them all out. He's going to try to find one that's still there and have her help him. Very interesting story. So he disguises himself with his companions. They come to this woman and he says, please, I want you to conjure up a spirit for me. And her initial response is, well, that's kind of dangerous because this King Saul, who she doesn't know is king yet, has threatened to kill all of the mediums. He says, no, you will not be blamed for what you do. The crown's kind of a giveaway, but conjure up Samuel for me, because remember Samuel died. He used to ask Samuel for advice. So we're told Samuel shows up, looks like Obi-Wan, it's a Force ghost. But when she sees him, she shrieks, and somehow she realizes that this guy is Saul. And the ground might kind of be a giveaway. He says, why have you deceived me? You're Saul. He says, don't be afraid. What do you say? Okay, so she says, I see a God rising from the earth. By the way, the details of this story are interesting. They do seem to kind of figure into, we know about necromantic practices in the ancient Near East, about how you communicate with usually dead ancestors in order to get vital information. So this would be sort of like searching Google. I see God rising there. What does he look like? Oh, he looks like an old man wrapped in a robe, and Saul knew it was Samuel. He bows. And then, oh, great Shakespearean line, why do you disturb me by conjuring up? And I says, because I'm in great distress. I need help. God's not talking to me. I've called upon you to tell me what I should do. Okay, well, this is sort of a full circle for him because that was one of his problems, right? That he wouldn't wait for Samuel to tell him what to do. Now he's asking. It's a bit too late. The shade Samuel explains to him, why do you ask me? God has abandoned you already. He's given the king over to your neighbor David. Also, by the way, he will deliver Israel and you into the hands of the enemy. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Yeah, I don't know what kind of voice he would have, but okay. So really cool sound effects. All collapses. Out of fear and weakness. He hasn't eaten all day. And so after um, asking him, please don't kill me because I'm a medium, she said, I'll make you some food. So she makes some food. He's still not too happy about things, and they leave. Okay. Then comes the battle. Getting ready for the battle. So meanwhile, on the Philistine side, the Philistines are all marching to their battle. The Philistine lords are being followed by David and his warriors, the king, right? They're sort of the paramilitary mercenaries to help him. And one of his commanders says, who are those Hebrews? What are they doing here? He says, oh, that's David, former officer of Saul. He's been with me for a year or two, and he's never done anything wrong. You trust him, in other words. He's not like going to betray us in battle. But the generals are not buying this. They say, send this guy away. It's too dangerous to ask them to fight their own people. You know, what a turn on us. Isn't the David who used to fight us all the time? So Achish says, well, you know, David, you're a good guy, honest. Want you to be with me in battle. But today I can't do it because my commanders aren't going to stand for it. So leave peacefully. You know, David's probably, he's going to complain outwardly, what have I done wrong? But inwardly, he's probably quite happy that he now has a off-ramp to not have to kill those people. He will have his adventure. So he says, yeah, you're good, you're good, you're good. So anyway, he sends him away. So off he goes with his merry band without having to kill fellow Israelites. Fortunately and unfortunately, they get their own adventure while the battle is raging. There are other episodes in history, by the way, where this happens, where someone who should be fighting on one side is off doing something else, basically to excuse themselves why they weren't at the battle. So this is narrative that explains why David was not there. It helps, again, to make it look good, because not only can he say the Philistines didn't allow me to fight against you, my own people, I was somewhere else. I have an alibi. So let's see what the alibi was. So on their way back to Ziklag, they find, oh my gosh, while they were gone, the Amalekites had raided. The Amalekites were those people who attacked Israel no reason on the Exodus. Bad people, right? They're kind of the bad guys of the Bible. And so they set his castle on fire. They take the women and children and all the stuff. Okay, so they get David and his merry men get back. They find the place burnt, their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. What do we do? Oh, even his wives are gone. Okay, so he's also kind of scared. He says soldiers are thinking of stoning him. I guess they don't really like his leadership right now. So they're just angry, right? They've lost their daughters. Of course, he wouldn't be angry. So so let's consult our divination device. So he checks it out and asks God, shall I pursue these raiders? Can I overtake them? Yahweh says, of course, go and pursue. You'll find and capture them. Okay, so with divine authorization, he then goes on a new mission to capture the innocent captives. And he leaves some of them behind who are too tired. And on the way, they run into an Egyptian who is almost dying from food and drink. They help him. They're nice to him. This is what you do for strangers on the road. And David asks him a question. Where do you come from? He said, "Oh, I'm the slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me because I fell sick. We raided this town called Ziklag a few days ago. Do you know it?" And he says, "Will you lead me to the raiders?" He says, "As long as you swear that you won't kill me for doing, and that you can give me back my master." He says, "Sir, I'll swear." Okay, so he leads them to the enemy encampment, and they attack. They win. They defeat the bad guys. The bad guys run off. They recovered their wives, their families, and their stuff. Okay, so they got all their stuff now. And they come back to the other people who had been waiting behind, and they say, "Hey, we're all together now." And at this point, there's a conflict. The people who actually did the fighting say, "Hey, we shouldn't share the plunder with the people who didn't fight." But David says, "No, no, let's share and share like it's God who gave us the victory. Why are you so, contentious?" And so everyone, again, is this kind of generous leader who didn't want to create invidious conflict within his group. And we're told this even became custom in Israel. So, okay, they return to their town, and then they also David sends his minions out to all the towns of Judah, it's his home tribal territory, and said, "Give some of the plunder to the elders there, not necessarily old people, but local leaders. So let's share the plunder with everyone. So not only did I not fight the Philistines against me, not only did God give victory to save my own people, gave me all this plunder to share with you." Now, why would he be doing that, do you think? What might his motive be for, all these different towns sending the plunder that we got to all of them? What have they ever done for us? They've been kind of, going along with what Saul tells them to do. Why offer this to them right at the time when Saul might be killed in battle?
We'll just build support.
Build support, potential support for the future. So this story is how David goes from outlaw to being king. The king part has two steps to it. The first one, he's becoming king of Judah, of his own tribal territory, and so sort of seeding. He's building the relationship, right? Yes, being the great patron here. Okay. Meanwhile, the Philistines have been defeating the Israelites in battle, and Saul and his sons are doing a last desperate stand. Some of his sons, including David's buddy Jonathan, are already dead. Finally, Saul is peppered with arrows, and he is depressed and asks his armor bearer to kill him so that he doesn't get captured by the enemy. But the armor bearer refuses to do this. So he falls on his own sword, and Saul dies. And the armor bearer dies too. Okay, so the battle is lost. Philistines won. The Israelites go home defeated. And the next day, the Philistines come and they find Saul and his son's bodies. They chop their heads off. They hang their bodies on the wall of the local town. And brought good news to temple of their idols and to the people. So again, a sort of shameful defeat. So Saul started by defeating the Philistines. That was his, his mission, and now he's defeated by them, and his body is impaled. However, some of the inhabitants nearby hear about this and go secretly take the body of him and his sons down at night to give them a proper burial. They bury them, and meanwhile, David is back in his burned town of Ziklag, and someone comes from the battle, shows him holding a crown. There actually are no crowns in this culture. Sometimes you'd wear a diadem, which is sort of like a little band around your head. We don't really know what the regalia was of the crown, though. That's sort of a European culture sort of reading itself into the past. But anyway, a guy comes from the battle, one of Saul's people, and he goes to David, and where do you come from? I escaped from the battle. What happened? The soldiers fled, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. And David says, "How do you know?" Check. Here's what the guy tells him. He says, well, Saul turned to me in battle and called me to him. He asked me, who are you? I say, an Amalekite. Ooh, never trust an Amalekite, right? He said, stand over me, please, and put me to death, for I am in great suffering, but still alive. So I stood over him and put to death, for I knew that he could not survive his wound. I removed the crown. Oh, I guess he does have a crown. It's probably a translation of something else from his head, and the armlet from his arm, and brought him here to David, my Lord. What actually happened, though, was quite different, as we know, right, from the narrative. In fact, the armor bearer person near Saul did kill him, so killed himself. So, what do you think the motive of this guy here is, other than he's a lying Amalekite? Why would he see this? What do you think his motive is of taking these tokens of the king to David? He was truthful. The king is dead. He says, I did it because I just wanted to put him out of his suffering. And oh, here are his stuff. Why do you think he does this? What is he motivated by? He doesn't say that Saul said, after you kill me, go tell David. This is something he chose to do, right? So as a character, what would be a motivation for him?
He thinks David's going to favor him because
He assumes, yeah, he assumes that that David would only be too happy to take over Saul's regalia, and that he would reward him for doing this, right? Yeah, and that's an unfair assumption given some of the behavior of kings that we've seen in the past, right? What else?
I guess the Amalekite didn't know that he had coined it.
We're not told. I mean, we don't know any information about this, but yeah, apparently he knew enough that he thought that David might want to be king. So he makes that assumption. How does David respond? How is it that you're not afraid to put forth your hand, desecrate Yahweh's anointed? Remember, this is something that he talked a lot about in his sparings of life. I would never touch someone anointed by God, right? So here, someone has touched him, at least by his own account. David says that's not cool. And we're told, your blood is on your head. You testified against yourself, and you said, I put the Lord's anointed to death. Kill him. And he kills him. Now, as a reaction, this could simply be seen as, David's emotion. After all, Saul was father-in-law until he gave his wife to someone else. Jonathan was like a brother to him, all this. So there may no need to maybe his emotion here. So we watch at David's reaction to things. We should also think of this as communication. This is happening in front of men. So by choosing immediately put this guy to death for killing Saul, what's that tell us? Saul's our enemy. He's been chasing us, but I'm going to put to death this guy for killing him. What would that tell us about what David wants his men to know about? Yeah.
Was Yahweh God of the Amalekite?
No, but of course you can refer to a national god without it being your god, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't expect you.
Not necessarily, no. And your question, how much would they know anyway? It's a certain. All I know is that they are portrayed as being, dastardly villains. This is exactly the sort of dastardly thing an Amalekite would do. Anyway, yeah, this is communication. It's to follow consistently in how David presents his relationship as he becomes king to the former king. He is not the conspirator against Saul, as he defended himself to Saul. He is not someone who is eager for Saul to die. He is Saul's avenger. This is how he's going to cast himself. He is the avenger of the house of Saul, not the person who usurped it, even though he in fact will usurp it. So this is communication as well as emotion. Okay. And he continues with this. Again, this is posting on social media here. He chants a lament about both of them, Saul and Jonathan. And, he tells this to the whole people. He commanded that this lament be taught to all the people of Judah, the people he's been giving stuff to, right? And Mark, here's where it says it was recorded in a book, right? So this is a very famous poem, a very famous song. It's traditionally called How the Mighty Have Fallen. So have you ever heard that expression, How the Mighty Have Fallen? It's a reference to this song. And basically, it's saying, how was it this happened? How could this possibly happen that these, mighty warriors have fallen before the enemy? I'm so sorry about this. Okay, then he checks the ephod, the divination device he asks God, where did I go? He says, go up to one of the cities of Judah. Oh, go to Hebron. Okay, so Hebron is not really a capital, but it's of a major settlement within his tribal territory. Okay, so God's saying it's time to go to Hebron. So he goes with his wives and his folks. And when he gets there, the men of Judah, that would be the tribal people, they anoint him as king over the house of Judah, over the tribe of Judah. Okay, so he is now no longer an outlaw, he is now king. But notice, narrative, its truth is it wasn't something he was grasping after. He wasn't waiting for Saul to die. He was, checking his divine, navigator. Can I go? Should I go now? Yes. Okay, so he's presenting himself as being completely obedient to the divine will, which happens to favor him. Okay. At this point, he is told about those nice people who buried Saul. And so, again, communication-wise, what is he going to say about this? He says, thank you for burying Saul, and I will show generosity to you as a result of this, and because I have been anointed in his place. So, again, the people who cared for the body, he will also favor. Now, meanwhile, we find out that Saul had another son, one that didn't die, probably because he wasn't in the battle. His name is Ishbaal. And Ishbaal is taken under the wings of one of Saul's generals. That's Avner, one of his generals. It says, Abner and Saul's surviving army takes Saul's son and brings him over to this place and makes him king. Okay, so David has been a king in Judah, and Ishbaal has been a king over Israel. And then we have this little map here. So here's what it looks like. So this is the tribal territory of Judah and Hebron, where David is now king. And this is everything else, which is, at least on paper, ruled by the house of Saul. So although Saul's dead, it's actually not an immediate end to the dynasty. There's going to be a challenge that continues throughout the next couple years of David's life from this rival capital over here. Okay, so something else happens. This seems kind of weird to us. Two groups of soldiers, some of Saul's soldiers led by Avner, and some of David's soldiers led by this guy Joab, who's like his general. They all meet. They meet at its pool, this sort of landmark, and they have a conversation. They're on enemy sides, but they say, "Let these young men perform for us." These young warriors. They don't look terribly happy at this because basically he's saying, let's have them fight it out. It may be something, again, and there's no explanation for why they're going to have them fight it out. It may be sort of a collective version of like, let's just have one person fight one person and that determine who wins, like David and Goliath. It also may be a reaction to David's gesture of gratitude to the people who beat Saul, because that was in Ishbaal's territory. So if David is favoring someone in Ishbaal territory, that'd be seen as a challenge to him, right? So I'm going to send my soldiers out there to have some words with David's soldiers. So they have a fight. They have 24 people, 12 on each side, and it says each one grasped his opponent's head, thrust his sword into his opponent's side, and they all died. Now I'm wondering whether this is like Monty Python style, or is that actually like they just fought and then they killed each other somehow? But there seems to be a senseless waste of human life. It's also been theorized, perhaps, that the idea behind these kind of gladiatorial duels is that gods are watching and will favor the one that is in the right. So it may be that we're going to have 12 people fight against each other to see which side is in the right, maybe here. We're told David's servants won, okay, but it doesn't end there, because one of David's so we have Joab, who's this guy here. He's like David's main general. He has two brothers, and the youngest one, Asahel, who's as quick as a gazelle, I say hell's quick as a gazelle. He's going to he's not going to let it stay. He's going to chase after Abner and take Abner, the enemy general, out. Okay, so you have the duel that ended. This guy is not going to let it end. He's going to keep going. And so here's poor Abner saying, "Is that you?" Yeah. He says, "Chasing me. Go bother someone else. If you get to me, I'll have to kill you." This is like a little kid. This is like the big, powerful general. I don't want to kill you. I don't want to. I don't want to cause any strife with your brothers. And he doesn't stop chasing him, so Abner has to kill him. And then everyone's sad. So this gladiatorial duel went wrong. A young man died, and everyone's sad. And in fact, their two brothers keep chasing. Right, they're going to avenge him. He keeps running, and finally they get to a place where he's being defended by people, and they're defended by people, and it is saying, must the sword devour forever? Can't we stop fighting one another? Let's just go our separate ways. And apparently Joab, right, the David's general, says, "Okay, if you hadn't said this, but okay, all right." So they stop fighting. Why this big diversion? Because we were talking about David a moment ago, right? Why were we talking about his generals? Well, the relationship between David and these two generals will become important as he moves closer to the king of everyone. Okay, so they call off the fight, they leave, and they lick their wounds, and they bury the dead. Okay, so we're told then there followed a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, in which David grew ever stronger and the house of Saul ever weaker. So again, this is sort of the scorecard. We have Ishmael versus David, two generals versus each other, and then the territories. But the actual story is broken up by a story of David's family. So we're told he had more sons, and he had more wives too. We're told how they became his wives. He has how many now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wives and 6 sons. We'll learn about these sons later. The war continues to go on. And we're told that even though David was winning the war, Abner, Saul's general, was gaining power over Saul's house. So in terms of the way power structure work, he's a potential usurper, right? He could very well take over the house of Saul. He's the one who has the troops, right? Think of what was that in the early years of the Ukraine war with the mercenary group. He had enough power that he could march on Moscow. That's kind of what Abner is like right now. Okay, so we're speeding this up here. So we're told also, apparently, that Abner has slept with Saul's concubine. And usually when you sexually penetrate a woman who belongs to your boss, it means you have aspirations on your boss's job in terms of power dynamics. So he is confronted by Saul's son there, and he kind of gets upset at this. How dare you do this? I'm the only reason you're still alive, and you're getting on my case for this. I might as well just go the whole kingdom to go over to David's side. So Ishmael's a bit scared about that. Abner sends a message to David. He says, "Hey, let's make an agreement, and I'll bring all of Israel over to your side. We'll end this war. You can be king over everyone." David's pretty happy about that. He says, "There's one small sticking item. My former wife, who Saul gave to someone else, I want her back. If you give her back to me, we can have peace." And unfortunately, she's married to someone else now. So he's going to break up a marriage to that. So the messengers go to the husband, and they said, "Okay, you're going back to David now. We're not told what she thinks about this, but the husband is not happy, and he's just crying." And Abner says, "Go back." So David gets his wife Michal back. So it's 7 wives, right? Okay. Abner then does some stump speeches. He says, you really should vote for David instead. You should go over to David's side. We all know he should be king. And he talks to his own tribe, which would be Saul's tribe, and everyone seems to be okay. He makes arrangements. David says he makes a big feast for them to sort of congratulate them on making peace. They bury the hatchet, as it were. He says, "I will go assemble all the people to make you king," and he goes off. Fortunately, just at this moment, Abner's enemy, Joab, right? He's the guy whose brother Abner killed. He comes back and finds out that David made peace with his brother's murderer, and so he's and has talk with David. He says, "What are you doing? Abner's your enemy. He's a spy on you. He doesn't have any designs on peace." And so Joab conspires to murder him. And so he waits for him to come back and stabs him to death. Okay, so he avenges himself on his brother. He's also put a little wrinkle in David's peace plan, because now the peacemaker has been murdered. And so David says, "Not my fault. I didn't do it. I didn't know about it." Kind of like with Saul. "I didn't make him die. It wasn't my fault." Same sort of washing his hands of this. And this emotional reaction goes with a very astute political act, which is to show sympathy for the dead, right? So he publicly shows that he is mourning over the peacemaker, follows him to the grave, writes a song about him, a lament, just like a lament about Saul and Jonathan. And we're told that all this weeping and wailing led the people to approve of him, because it communicated to them that he was not the one who killed, or he did not order the killing of this man, right? It was just bad henchmen who did it. Okay, so he also has a conversation with his own military men, say, the guy who did this no good. I hope he has a terrible end, and he will have a terrible end when David, on his deathbed, will tell his son to kill him. But anyway, that's that. Meanwhile, Ishmael's scared because he's lost Abner, and two of Ishmael's men, these guys, what are their names? Anna and Rechab. They say it's about time to do something. It looks like this side is collapsing. Maybe we should ingratiate ourselves with David. So they do this by going to Ishmael's house silently, petting him, taking the head and presenting it to David. It says, "Here's the head of your enemy who sought your life. Thus has Yahweh avenged you on Saul." Kind of like the Amalekite thing, right? And David responds exactly the same way. Why do you think this would be a good thing? Killed an innocent man. And if I executed the Amalekite for killing Saul, who wasn't so innocent, how much more should I do to you for killing an innocent man? So again, both, he's a sense, I mean, he's consistent in this way, but he's also very political. He says, I want to demonstrate that I'm the avenger of Saul's house, not its usurper. So he cuts their hands, feet off, and buries Ishmael. And finally, here we are at the end, all the tribes come to him saying, "Look, we are your bone, your flesh, your kindred," right? Even though they're not our tribe, we're all one family, essentially. We knew, even when Saul was saying that you were the one who did all the work, and somehow they have either heard or affirmed this idea that God will make you the shepherd of Israel, and they anoint him as king. So he's been anointed twice. So the outlaw is now king twice. And it's been a long haul to get there, hasn't it? But of course, part of the length of it is that each of these episodes tells us something about David. If we could sum up what we looked at today, what are some characteristics about David that come to the fore? The good, bad, the ugly, all of them. Right? So we'll see more of them next week. What are some characteristics? How would we describe him as a character? He's cunning. He's not stupid. He thinks ahead, right? He thinks, what will it look like if I'm fighting my own people? Can I get out of this somehow? He can also do double talk, right? So he's definitely smart.
You do want to build coalitions.
He knows how to build coalitions, right? Even if there's an entire whitewash, even if David really more like Michael Corleone and he secretly ordered all these executions, he's basically he's saying this is bad blood. It's not to lead a unified nation. So he does have sense how to build coalitions. He says, let's use our plunder for the good of others, so they will be nice to us, unlike Nabal. So he's a suit in that sense. He can relationship, and that's the first time we've seen a king doing that in the Bible, right? Usually kings are more concerned about their own staying alive, right? And notice that's exactly how one expects David to think when they kill Saul, or when they say they kill Saul, when they kill Saul. They expect him to adopt that logic of power, but he doesn't. Even there are times when he's terribly violent. Right? Anything?
Doesn't, because he has respect for Yahweh.
Yes.
Abigail talks him out of killing her husband,
Mm-hmm.
bringing up respect Yahweh, and he tells the fellow that claimed to have killed Saul, "You killed Yahweh's anointed."
This is a good point. And notice that the advice from characters who he rejects also claim to be telling him what Yahweh wants. So it's not that he simply listens to people who sound pious, right? He is able to discern what they are using that pious language to advance, right? And he's able to discern whether, saying God wants X is actually, in fact, what is wanted. And notice that when he makes those decisions, he doesn't consult the divinative device. He doesn't consult AI. He actually somehow interiorly has developed he's formed that habit of thought that builds the character that he is. All good things. There are some bad things too, right? We've seen the week before this. We saw, remember that whole thing about how the priests were all slaughtered by Saul, and he's like, didn't. He owns responsibility, but he also didn't do anything about it. Could have. So there are moments like that as well, where he could do something. He could have done something differently, but he didn't. Um, Also, it's like, yeah, I will murder all these people, so they won't tell the Philistines that I'm not murdering my people. I mean, at least in our way of thinking, that's a bit off. But nevertheless, he's a complicated character, right? Yeah, that's next week. David as king. King David is next week. We will see all that. And again, it's going to be terrible. Instead, bad stuff will happen. And we'll see. And we can ask ourselves, has fundamental character changed? Has it been deformed in some fundamental way? Is it kingship that does this to him? Certainly the means he appears kingship is very, very astute, very noble, and all this. But when he gets in that position, he starts behaving like Saul. So again, there's certainly a glorification of David. It may also be a critique of kingship still. But again, it's never black and white here. He's the good and the bad and the ugly all together, and we'll see all of that next week too. Thank you. All right. All right.